Welcome to Resourced and Resourceful Leadership, a podcast for people who care about the world and their impact in it. I'm Dr. Christine Pettit, and I'm so glad that you're here with me. Thank you. In today's episode, I'm going to share with you a challenge that I'm doing this month, which if you're listening in real time, it's June 2026, but you can do this challenge anytime. And it is the Inner Wise Self Love Note Challenge. So I'll share about that, invite you to do it along with me. And then I'm also going to talk today about how in my just writing in the last few days, I've been making connections between past organizing work, labeling in therapy and coaching modalities, and conversations that I've had recently or am about to release on the podcast. So I'm excited to share with you what I've been thinking about and one of my favorite practices for pulling out inner wisdom and getting clarity when I might feel stuck or pulled in different directions, or just when I need to give myself a little bit of encouragement. So the Inner Wise Self Love Note Challenge that I'm doing is to spend 3 minutes a day writing from the perspective of my inner wise self. And this is a practice that I learned from artist and activist SARK, Susan Ariel Rainbow Kennedy. You've heard me talk about her a number of times if you've listened to this podcast, because she is someone that I've learned from for almost 30 years now. If you can believe it. If I can believe it. How am I even that old? Anyway, the idea behind the Inner Wise Self-Love Note is to imagine that there is an inner wise person inside of you who has nothing but unconditional love and positive regard for you. They really think the world of you. You're not going to hear criticism come out in this letter. Maybe some shoulds, but in a very loving way. It's all love and not criticism, judgment, etc. And so you imagine and connect with this kind of persona of the inner wise self and write a letter to yourself from that perspective. I set a timer for 3 minutes and then just write, and whatever comes out, just see what wisdom is there for you. I also have a YouTube video on this. I think it might have been the first one that I recorded sharing this practice. And you can hear more about it and actually do it in real time with me or along with the recording if you would like. But I encourage you to do this. I decided to do it once a day in June, like I said, because I was doing some writing under the blue moon on Sunday, and I wrote that I want to spend time with my inner wise self daily in June. That just kind of came out, and so then I said I commit to 3 minutes a day of journaling with inner wise self every day in June, and to send an email to my list to invite them. So if you're on my email list, I sent that invitation to you. I've shared it on social media. I shared about the practice on LinkedIn. I don't know that I shared about the challenge. And I shared about the challenge on Instagram and Facebook. If you're up for the daily challenge, whatever day you're listening to this, please join me. Even if you do it just once, just 3 minutes, I believe that you will find it worth your while. So I encourage you to get out your notebook, get something to write with, connect with your inner wise self. Even if you're like, I don't know that I know how to connect with my inner wise self, this is a great way to practice. Just saying, okay, let's just imagine, let's pretend that there is this inner wise self inside of me that loves me in this way, that looks at me with this unconditional positive regard, and that has wisdom for me. And let's see what that wisdom is. And it could be that you ask a specific question to your inner wise self. It could be just what wants to come to the surface. So I think I wrote myself like a general letter the first day. Yes. And then these last 2 days, I've written to parts of myself. So yesterday, I wrote to the hypervigilant part of myself. And then today, I wrote to a scared to be seen part of myself. So that was actually fun. My inner wise self kind of took on a voice that was a little bit more sassy, I guess. And I text my friend Megan and I was like, my inner wise self was really channeling you, because I call her my aggressive cheerleader. So she is aggressive cheerleading, and I just heard that that voice came out. So it's funny. It's because I feel like I'm opening up to the change that I wanted to welcome in this year. And I even wrote at the top of my notes for this episode, which are very brief, I wrote, time to level up. So I'm just like feeling that right now. And I feel like connecting with my inner wise self is connecting with that. Like that is the thing that will help guide me in the leveling up that I am working on and towards and doing. So anyway, do you want to join me with the Inner Wise Self Love Note Challenge? Do you want to do it every day? You want to just try it once? Come on, I would love it. I want to hear from you too, like how it was for you, what your experience was. Was it hard, easy? What wisdom came out? So please set a timer for 3 minutes and just write from that inner wise self. See what happens. Now, what I love about, I guess, the energy this month, or the intention of coming to at least write for 3 minutes each day from this perspective, is that I've also added in like a space to just do a brain dump of basically like a to-do list, because I have a running to-do list in my head. So just getting the brain dump out. And I've been doing that before my inner wise self love note. Sometimes I do like a 3-minute meditation just to get grounded ahead of time, but you don't have to do any of these things. I just like to occasionally clear the space for them. But more writing is coming, and I'm appreciating that. And in particular, I did an interview yesterday, which you'll get to hear in a couple weeks, with my friend and fellow coach and community member, Edie. And after that interview, I was like, I need to write down some things that were just coming up, and like some connections that were coming up for me with the last interview I did with Catherine. So I encourage you to listen to that interview with Catherine Golub if you haven't heard it yet. She's a conflict coach, city council member, and just has a really interesting story and does impactful work with change makers. And then Edie will be coming up in a few weeks, and I am really excited for you to hear that conversation too. We talk about her approach that weaves astrology and coaching and many, many other things. But yeah, some of what was coming up for me as I was writing yesterday that I wanted to share in terms of making these connections. One was just Edie and I have a connection that we started our work in the nonprofit field in kind of the domestic violence space. In particular, I worked at the Center Against Rape and Domestic Violence in Oregon when I started out as a volunteer in college, and then I ended up working there as well. So as a volunteer and as an employee, sometimes I had the hotline that people would call for support, and occasionally I worked in one of the shelters that the organization had. And then I went on to do administrative work too for the organization. And that was kind of my entry point into the work, and it was personal in some ways. And I'm thinking about just it being the beginning of kind of work related to social change. That was, very much on a personal level, that one-on-one individual work, but even the existence of that organization came from movements of women, came from, movements of survivors, and just its existence. It was political in that sense. But I was also thinking about Catherine, the interview with her, because she does this kind of group and one-on-one coaching for people who do organizing and movement work. And when I heard about what she offered, I was like, oh my gosh, I really could have benefited from that space so much, especially when I was a union organizer and leader. And instead, I really didn't have a cadre of other leaders who understood what I was experiencing. And so I was experiencing a high level of stress and depression, and I went to a therapist. And I think there was a lot about that therapist that was supportive. But I often think about the fact that she labeled my work as egodystonic, which was a label I had never heard before. But I'm going to just read it right now. I guess it's also called ego alien. Refers to thoughts, impulses, or behaviors that are in direct conflict with your core values, self-image, and identity. They clash with who you fundamentally are, feel intrusive, unwelcome, and we talked about, she labeled the work that I was doing as egodystonic, like this idea that it violates core values or causes internal distress. And I was experiencing a lot of distress, but it wasn't so much because of my work and the work that I was doing. In fact, I loved it and found it to be really important to be organizing fellow workers and to be fighting for progressive changes in our contracts and to be in solidarity with other workers and to be organizing new groups of workers. Like, all of that was totally in alignment with my values, and I loved it. And it was a total pressure cooker environment. It was an environment that was very unhealthy in ways. There was a lot of internal dynamics that made it really challenging. There were factions, there was fighting and infighting. And I was pretty young. I mean, I was my later 20s, early 30s, but it was a big job. When I was president of my union, it was a big job. And my first real experience in that level of leadership. And what I think didn't match my values or my way of being was kind of the form of leadership that was expected of me by those that were closest to me in that organizing space. And the tension that came up where I was in a space where it hurt friendships that I had. I lost friendships in that time of my life and in that kind of leadership moment. And it wasn't just what was expected of me. In fact, like, it was my values that shaped my behavior, I think my values and sensibilities in a way that guided me even when it cost those friendships and those relationships. And that was really painful. And then I was just also in this environment. I learned so much from it, not to silver line it. I'm really grateful for a lot of my experience, but having that label, egodystonic, didn't help me figure out how to do the work. And I think, what I have learned over the years is you do need to develop your own barometer of success. You do need to find your own peers, or peers that can understand the work that you're doing and connect with them. And then you need support as well from like therapy or coaching or whatever that might look like, other things that support your health and well-being. But it's like all of those things. And so, yeah, I just at the time didn't really know how to move and didn't have the support that I needed. So I left that very burnt out. I left it feeling suicidal. So my mental health was shot, and it took me a while to recover from that. And I was able to, I guess, alchemize that experience into lessons that I brought into my next leadership role. And I didn't do that perfectly, but I was intentional about integrating what I had learned. And I had a more robust support system, and I in part knew that I needed to cultivate that, and partially I was lucky because the work that I was doing had some support built in. There was coaching built in. I had peers in 14 different locations around the state and facilitated times for us to come together to learn and commiserate with one another, and to occasionally retreat together and, be in a space where we could connect and laugh and cry and dream and strategize together. So I really learned a lot, and I brought those lessons through, and then I also had just more robust support. And I think that's so important. When I was also talking with Edie, which you'll hear, both of us really resonate with the internal family systems modality. It's a therapeutic modality, but also used in coaching, and it's also just a helpful framework I have found. And she talked about it as non-pathologizing, and I appreciated just thinking about that label, or the lack of the label, the idea of being non-pathologizing is normalizing that we do have these different parts, different impulses and behaviors that are part of the human experience, and they are not us. Like when I talked about writing to my hypervigilant part or my scared to be seen part, that is not all of me and who I am. But if I'm not aware of those parts, I can easily let them run the show. And so, it's not even labeling those parts as bad, or the behaviors that I might engage in as a result of acting from those parts as bad or giving them a negative label. It is really about building awareness and developing kind of a relationship with all of the parts of us and providing acceptance and love to them from that place that is more grounded, that in internal family systems, they call it self with a capital S. I like, that inner wise self. Some people might call it God, universe. There's many names for this. But it's that kind of energy of being whole, being grounded, and that we all have that within ourselves. And so I was just thinking, even like this label that my therapist gave the work of egodystonic, to me, that was pathologizing in a way of like, ooh, that's bad. And I mean, again, labels can be helpful to create awareness about what's going on, but what I have found more helpful is finding support and like being able to define how I want to show up, how I want to lead, what my values are, and kind of the support networks around that to be able to move through challenging situations. Some other notes that I was putting together here too are like going back to how the way that I navigated leadership and the way people responded to me in my union leadership days did create fractures and friendships and a lot of hurt. And one of my mentors would say this phrase, like in politics and in organizing and the social change work, there's no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. And I really hated that. I think because of the hurt that I experienced and that I did actually lose friendships that were important to me. And I saw him as a friend too. I didn't like that. Again, I think it touched on this feeling of like disposability. And it just felt personal. Like friendship is personal. So yeah, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. That felt just really harsh to me. Later on, I heard a similar sentiment, and I do agree with it in the sense of kind of a flexibility of understanding where you might align in some places and not others. But I heard it articulated as relationships are always subject to negotiation or renegotiation. Basically, like relationships can change. People can change. Our ideas can change and shift. The way we're related to one another, that can change. To me, that was a lot more a humanizing way to put it, too. Because when you think friends and enemies, like good or bad, instead of like relationships, we are all in relationship in different ways. And I appreciate that. I also, when you get into that friend-enemy territory, I think about how as organizers or how organizers often treat people if they don't see power the same way or don't go along with like the campaign demands, then that person is written off as not being down or disregarded. And I will say I've 100% done this in my life. And I look back on that and I just think like that's not a very human way to relate. And it's also a very, like, dare I say authoritarian, but like just a very black and white way of seeing people is like, oh, you're either with us or against us. You're either going, and like, it's like, oh, you have to see the campaign, the thing we're trying to change exactly the same way that we do, and like believe in moving power the exact same way that we do. And you can't ask questions, you can't say things the wrong way or slightly different. And I'm not talking about like people being, incredibly hateful and like whatever. I'm talking about like average community folks, that your average person who like, might just not see things exactly the way you do, or like might not follow the party line or the campaign line. And just to see those folks get written off as quote unquote problematic or whatnot, it's just not a very human or restorative or just way, I think, of relating to people. And I was just talking with Stephanie Keiko Kong, Pony Ponytail, on Instagram and other places. And, she really talks about building community where you are and not like knowing your neighbors' names, like not writing people off. She can articulate it in beautiful ways that I'm not going to do right now. But just it resonated with me, like on that human level of like in a time of crisis, being able to know your neighbor's name, like even caring about people in these life or death moments, in these relational moments. So that perhaps will be a thread that I don't fully tie up in this episode, but we'll revisit. But I am just really grateful for the way that I am able to be in conversation with rad people, to learn from them, to go back and make connections to my experiences. And yeah, I'm really grateful too for my inner wise self to guide me to where I am right now in this moment. And as always, I am just really grateful for you listening here with me. And I'd love it if you wrote from the perspective of your inner wise self and shared that with me. If you want to hear more of the Resourced and Resourceful Leadership podcast, please follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. To support the show, please leave a 5-star review and share it with a few people who you think would appreciate it. And also, you can check out the link to SpeakPipe in the show notes. I'd love it if you left me a message about what stood out to you or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Thanks again, and take good care.